It was a dark, chaotic scene inside Lisa Raymundo's Stamford condo. Blood streaked the bathroom floor, streaked over the sink, and spilled across the walls. The air was thick with violence. The victim lay in a pool of her own blood, her body stabbed multiple times, her life violently taken by a woman she never suspected. Sheila Davalloo, the woman responsible, was close to the victim's boyfriend, but no one saw the rage building inside her. As investigators sifted through the disturbing evidence, it became clear this wasn't just a murder. It was the culmination of jealousy, obsession, and a love triangle gone horribly wrong. Before we dive into this twisted and tragic story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This way, you won't miss any future deep dives into true crime cases just like this one. Before the tragedy, Sheila Davalloo lived a seemingly ordinary life. Sheila had a solid career as a pharmaceutical researcher. She was intelligent, articulate, and presented herself as someone with everything in place. But beneath the surface, there were cracks in Sheila's life that would soon become the foundation of a brutal crime. Sheila married Paul Christos, a man she had met years before, but their relationship was far from perfect. Friends and family would later testify that Sheila was deeply insecure. Though outwardly calm and composed, her private world was filled with tension. By 2001, she was becoming increasingly obsessed with Nelson Sessler, a co-worker from Purdue Pharma, where she worked alongside Lisa Raymundo. Sessler and Raymundo had begun a romantic relationship, something that fueled Sheila's jealousy and resentment. At first, Davalloo and Sessler's relationship was just a physical affair, but as time went on, Sheila grew possessive and consumed by thoughts of losing him. This spiraled into an unhealthy fixation. Despite the affair ending in 2002, Sheila was unable to let go of her feelings for Sessler. She felt as though he was slipping away from her, and that's when her jealousy took a darker turn. The stage was set for a devastating collision of emotions, secrets, and lies. Sheila's obsession with Sessler had become an all-consuming force, one that no longer respected boundaries, relationships, or even life itself. In the months leading up to November 8, 2002, Sheila's life had become a powder keg, and it only needed a spark to explode. And that spark would come on that fateful day, a day that would forever change the lives of 3 people. On November 8th, Lisa Raymundo was found dead in her Stamford condo, brutally murdered by someone who had been far closer than anyone could have imagined. The morning of November 8th, 2002, began like any other for Lisa Raymundo. She had spent the previous evening in her Harbor Drive condo in Stamford, Connecticut, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Until suddenly it all ended in a violent and grisly scene. Raymundo was discovered by her boyfriend, Nelson Sessler, who arrived at her condo after work. What he found was not only shocking, but something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lisa was lying lifeless on the floor, her body covered in stab wounds, a clear sign that she had fought for her life. Her death was brutal, a combination of multiple stabbings and blunt force trauma to the head. She had been attacked with such ferocity that the crime scene seemed almost chaotic. Blood splattered across the walls, and signs of a violent struggle were evident in every room. Yet, despite the obvious signs of a violent altercation, there were no signs of forced entry into the condo. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, no valuables, no signs of burglary. This left investigators to wonder, what could have been the motive? What had driven someone to such a horrific act? The answer would take some time to surface, but the first piece of the puzzle came in the form of a 911 call. The dispatcher who answered the call was told that a man was attacking a woman at the Harborview Drive condo. The voice on the other end of the line seemed frantic, but the caller was a woman who claimed to have witnessed the crime. As the police pieced together the initial details, they discovered something chilling. The voice on the 911 call was, in fact, Sheila Davalloo's. This was a major turning point in the investigation. Sheila had at some point been involved with Raymundo's boyfriend, Nelson Sessler, and had grown increasingly jealous and possessive. This connection was now coming under scrutiny. Investigators also found something deeply disturbing at the crime scene. a blood stain in a bathroom with evidence pointing to Sheila's involvement. There were pieces of men's clothing scattered throughout, items that did not belong to Raymundo's boyfriend, Nelson. The blood in the bathroom and the items left behind told investigators they were dealing with a crime that wasn't just random or impulsive. It was personal. At first glance, Sheila Davalloo didn't seem like someone capable of committing such a brutal crime. A highly educated woman with a promising career, Sheila was employed as a pharmaceutical researcher at Purdue Pharma. But beneath the surface, there was much more to her story than met the eye. Born in 1969, Sheila had a tumultuous past marked by a series of strained relationships and unexplained behavioral shifts. She had been married to Paul Christos, a man she would later attempt to murder in a chillingly similar fashion to Raymundo. Their marriage, however, was rocky from the start. Friends and family described her as controlling and secretive, and her marriage to Christos was characterized by emotional abuse, manipulation, and isolation. Sheila's behavior grew increasingly erratic, and as her mental state deteriorated, so did the dynamics of her relationship with Christos. In 2001, while still married to Paul, Sheila became involved with Nelson Sessler, a colleague at Purdue Pharma. This relationship quickly became a point of tension between Sheila and her husband, especially when Sheila became obsessed with the idea of being with Sessler. The affair began with the promise of a passionate escape, but it soon escalated into a love triangle fraught with jealousy, manipulation, and deceit. By late 2002, Sheila's obsession with Sessler had grown into something more sinister. She began to see Raymundo, Sessler's girlfriend, as the final obstacle standing between her and the life she wanted. Sheila's jealousy became all-consuming. She was no longer just a woman scorned. She was a woman who believed she had a right to Sessler's affection, no matter the cost. Her mind began to spiral as she plotted how to eliminate Raymundo once and for all. This obsession was the catalyst for the murder of Lisa Raymundo. Sheila's plan to kill Raymundo in order to rekindle her romance with Sessler was methodical and calculated. But it wasn't just about eliminating a rival, it was about maintaining control over every aspect of her life. Sheila's growing paranoia and need for control manifested in an extreme and violent way. When police began to piece together Sheila's history, it became clear that she had a long-standing pattern of obsessive behavior and violence. Her prior violent acts, including the stabbing of her husband in 2003, drew a direct connection between her and Raymundo's murder. The similarities between the two incidents were undeniable, and Sheila quickly emerged as the prime suspect. November 8, 2002. The day Lisa Raymundo was found brutally murdered inside her condominium on Harbor Drive in Stamford, Connecticut, marked the culmination of a twisted and obsessive plot. The scene that greeted first responders was one of unrelenting violence, a place that still seemed to echo with the chaos of the struggle that had taken place. Raymundo's body was discovered in the living room, surrounded by blood and signs of a violent confrontation. But the real mystery lay in the small details that the investigators began to uncover. Upon entering the condo, the police found no signs of forced entry, which immediately ruled out a burglary gone wrong. This pointed to someone who had been allowed inside, someone familiar with the victim and the home. The absence of a break-in, combined with the lack of missing items, Raymundo's jewelry, personal effects, and expensive items remained untouched, suggested that this wasn't a crime motivated by robbery, but something far more personal. The condo was in disarray, but not in the way one might expect from a typical home invasion. There were bloodstains in various locations, some fresh, others smeared, and some that had been diluted by water, indicating a frantic attempt to clean up the scene. Among the most telling pieces of evidence found was a blood-stained sink handle in the bathroom. State Trooper Don Elmendorf would later testify that the blood found in the bathroom belonged to both Raymundo and Sheila Davalloo, the latter of which was discovered through DNA analysis. This detail was critical. It tied Davalloo to the crime scene in a way that left little room for doubt. In addition to the blood stains, two men's clothing items, a tan dress shirt and a green tie, were found in the half-bathroom adjacent to the scene of the murder. These items were later identified as belonging to Davalloo's lover, Nelson Sessler, who had been romantically involved with both Davalloo and Lisa. While this discovery could have been written off as insignificant, it was anything but. The presence of these items in the immediate aftermath of Raymundo's murder added a layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that Davalloo's connection to the crime was not merely circumstantial, but deliberate. The brutality of the crime spoke for itself. Raymundo had been stabbed 9 times, with one of the wounds puncturing her lung. Her head showed signs of blunt force trauma, indicating that the attacker had taken steps to ensure her death was as painful and violent as possible. Medical examiner H. Wayne Carver's autopsy findings confirmed the ferocity of the attack. Raymundo had fought back in a desperate attempt to survive, but her injuries were too severe. But the question remained, what drove her to kill Lisa Raymundo? Was it merely jealousy, or was there something deeper, something darker, at play? Sheila Davalloo's life story is one marked by contradictions, psychological turmoil, and a pattern of manipulation. By the time she stood trial for the murder of Lisa Raymundo in 2012, her criminal history was already deeply intertwined with violent acts, deceit, and obsession. It was clear that her life, like a ticking time bomb, had been building up to this devastating moment. In 2003, just months after the murder of Raymundo, Sheila would attack her husband, Paul Christos, in what appeared to be a random outburst of violence. The two were involved in a dangerous and sexually charged game involving handcuffs and blindfolds when Sheila, without warning, grabbed a knife and stabbed her husband twice. Miraculously, Christos survived, but the attack was a harbinger of things to come. During her trial for the stabbing, Sheila was described as a woman with a propensity for controlling others and using manipulation to get what she wanted. She often claimed to be the victim in relationships, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. In the case of Raymundo, it became apparent that Sheila's obsession with Nelson Sessler played a pivotal role in the killing. Despite their tumultuous relationship, Sheila had hoped that she could rekindle her affair with him. But there was an obstacle. Lisa Raymundo, who had become Sessler's girlfriend, was standing in the way. From all accounts, Sheila felt that Raymundo was a rival, a woman who had what she wanted. And when Sheila couldn't control her jealousy and rage, she decided that the only solution was to eliminate Raymundo altogether. This sense of entitlement was evident in Sheila's manipulation of those around her. She kept up appearances at work, even as she carried on her secret affair with Sessler, and her obsession grew more consuming by the day. She told Paul Christos about a love triangle in which she was the victim, framing herself as the innocent party even though she was the one pulling the strings. To Christos, Sheila was a woman who constantly sought control, shifting blame and using his affection for her to manipulate him into forgiving her violent actions. At the same time, Sheila was portrayed as an emotional woman who had difficulty processing rejection or conflict. Her breakdown during her cross-examination of Paul Christos in 2012's trial, where she became visibly upset while questioning him about his scars, was just one example of how Sheila's emotions would often boil over when she felt cornered or out of control. Despite this, her ability to mask her true nature was part of what made her so dangerous. She was not a typical violent criminal. She was intelligent, calculating, and capable of charming those around her into believing she was the victim in almost any situation. Psychologists who evaluated Sheila during her pre-trial stages noted her narcissistic tendencies, suggesting that she viewed the world through a lens of entitlement and self-interest. She believed that everyone else in her life existed to fulfill her needs, and when those needs were not met, she resorted to violent measures to regain control. In Sheila's mind, Raymundo was just one more obstacle, and eliminating her would make room for Sheila to get what she wanted, a relationship with Nelson Sessler. This mindset would become more evident as the investigation unfolded, and as Sheila's past crimes became central to understanding her motivations. As the prosecution began piecing together the timeline of events leading up to Raymundo's death, it became increasingly clear that Sheila had premeditated the crime. She wasn't just acting on impulse. She had a plan, a strategy, and a ruthless determination to remove anyone who stood in her way. The more investigators dug into Sheila's life and her history, the clearer it became that she was a woman who was willing to go to extreme lengths to satisfy her own desires. And the murder of Lisa Raymundo would be the culmination of that unrelenting obsession, a crime of passion, masked as a cold-blooded act of control. The investigation into Lisa Raymundo's murder was a painstaking process, piecing together a bloody puzzle with only the faintest of clues. It was the blood evidence that would provide the first major link between Sheila Davalloo and the murder. One of the most critical pieces of evidence presented in court during the trial was the DNA found on a bloodstain in Raymundo's bathroom. Investigators discovered that the blood on the sink handle was a mixture of two different DNA profiles, Lisa Raymundo's and Sheila Davalloo's. This revelation was a bombshell. How could Sheila's DNA end up at the crime scene if she wasn't involved in the murder? To understand this, one must consider the position of the bloodstain in the bathroom. The location suggested that someone was trying to clean themselves up after the crime. State Trooper Don Elmendorf, who helped process the crime scene, testified that the bloodstain appeared to have been diluted, as though the person responsible had been standing in front of the sink attempting to wash the blood off their hands. This behavior wasn't typical for someone who had just committed murder, leading investigators to believe that Sheila had been trying to rid herself of evidence while also trying to maintain her innocence. One key detail that made the investigation even more perplexing was a phone call made to 911. A woman's voice had reported the murder, claiming that a man was attacking her neighbor at the condo. The voice was initially untraceable, but through sophisticated voice recognition analysis, experts confirmed that it was Sheila's voice on the call. This, coupled with the evidence at the crime scene, linked Sheila directly to the location at the time of the murder. While there were no immediate leads pointing directly to Sheila, investigators were able to track down the timeline of events through digital forensics. It was soon discovered that Sheila had been in the area on the day of the murder, and in what would turn out to be a major breakthrough in the case, it was found that she had used a cell phone near Raymundo's condo around the time of the murder. Sheila's own voice on the 911 call, paired with the overwhelming forensic evidence, placed her at the scene. These findings were crucial in solidifying the prosecution's case. As the investigation continued, one thing became abundantly clear. Sheila was not the innocent bystander she had tried to portray herself as. Her DNA, her voice, and her presence at the scene tied her irrevocably to the brutal murder of Lisa Raymundo. But investigators still needed a clearer understanding of why she had killed Raymundo, and that would lead them into the deeply twisted nature of Sheila's obsession with Nelson Sessler. The prosecution's case against Sheila Davalloo was built on this foundation of physical evidence. Each clue from the crime scene, every drop of blood, every discarded item, every piece of DNA, told the story of a woman who was willing to do anything to eliminate anyone who stood in her way, all in the name of love. But was it love, or was it something far darker? The answer would come in the form of Sheila's relationship with Sessler, and how that twisted relationship helped drive her to murder. As the trial unfolded, the motive behind Lisa Raymundo's brutal murder became clearer. At the heart of this tragedy was a woman consumed by obsessive desire, Sheila Davalloo. The crime wasn't just about Raymundo's death, it was about Sheila's overwhelming need to possess Nelson Sessler, a man who had been at the center of her emotional turmoil for years. To understand the full scope of Sheila's motive, we must first look at her complicated relationships with both Sessler and her ex-husband, Paul Christos. Sheila and Nelson Sessler had met at Purdue Pharma in 2001, where they began a physical affair. Though their initial relationship was somewhat casual, it quickly escalated. Sheila, who was married at the time to Paul Christos, was never honest with Sessler about her personal life, presenting herself as a woman who was emotionally available and ready to move on from her marriage. Their affair, however, was short-lived, and by the end of 2002, Sessler had grown increasingly serious with Lisa Raymundo, his long-term girlfriend. Raymundo, who had recently moved to Stamford for a new job, had become a central figure in Sessler's life, and their relationship seemed to be blossoming. Sheila, who still harbored feelings for Sessler, could not bear the idea of losing him to someone else. Her jealousy and obsessive tendencies began to take hold. Sheila's fixation on Sessler intensified as she became more and more desperate to reclaim his attention. According to court testimony, Sheila's obsession with Sessler was not just about love, it was about control. She felt entitled to him, believing that their past affair meant they were destined to be together. Sheila's resentment toward Raymundo grew with every passing day. But Sheila's obsession went far beyond a simple affair gone wrong. At some point, her fixation morphed into something more dangerous, an idea that the only way to eliminate the competition was through violence. In the weeks leading up to Raymundo's death, Sheila's mental state deteriorated. She confided in her ex-husband Paul Christos about a fictitious love triangle involving Raymundo, Sessler, and herself. However, Christos didn't know that Sheila had been part of this triangle herself. He was unaware of her ongoing relationship with Sessler. The affair between Sheila and Sessler, combined with her increasingly erratic behavior, made her a ticking time bomb. In late 2002, while Raymundo was becoming more serious with Sessler, Sheila grew more determined to remove any and all obstacles that stood between her and the man she believed should be hers. The more time she spent obsessing over the situation, the more delusional her thoughts became. At this point, Sheila began to see herself as the victim, convinced that Raymundo was stealing Sessler from her. It is within this framework of obsession and desperation that Sheila made the decision to kill Lisa Raymundo. The prosecution's theory was that Sheila planned the murder in cold blood, knowing full well that Raymundo's death would bring her closer to Sessler. She believed that by removing Raymundo from the equation, she would have an unobstructed path to Sessler. But this plan was built on false assumptions about how relationships and emotions work. She failed to understand that Sessler was not simply going to fall into her arms because Raymundo was gone. In fact, the murder only drove Sessler further away from her. It wasn't until after Raymundo's murder that the full extent of Sheila's relationship with Sessler came to light. Nelson Sessler was initially unaware of the lengths Sheila had gone to in order to win him back. Even after Raymundo's death, Sheila made a calculated attempt to comfort Sessler, rekindling their physical relationship and traveling with him to ski resorts in an attempt to erase the pain of his loss. But things began to unravel. As time passed, Sessler became suspicious of Sheila's behavior, particularly her tendency to weave a web of lies. It was only after Sheila's violent attack on Paul Christos that he came forward to Stamford police, warning them about Sheila's potential involvement in Raymundo's murder. Christos had been unaware of Sheila's obsession with Sessler when they were married, but after being attacked by her in March 2003, he began to connect the dots. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Sheila continued to insist on her innocence, choosing to challenge every aspect of the investigation. She pressed the prosecution's witnesses, trying to poke holes in their testimony. But every time she raised an argument, the prosecution countered it with facts and evidence that painted a clear picture of her guilt. The presence of her blood at the crime scene, the lack of any signs of forced entry into Raymundo's condo, and the testimonies of witnesses. All of this pointed to a deliberate and premeditated murder, committed by a woman who was driven by obsession and jealousy. The turning point in the trial came when Nelson Sessler, the man at the center of the love triangle, took the stand. Sessler's testimony was damning. He described his relationship with both Sheila and Raymundo, explaining how their affair had ended and how he had grown close to Raymundo before her death. Sessler spoke about the emotional toll the murder had taken on him, and how Sheila had comforted him in the days after Raymundo's death. But perhaps the most chilling part of Sessler's testimony was when he revealed that he had started to suspect Sheila's involvement in the murder only after she attacked her own husband. Sessler stated that he had worn a wire for the police and recorded several conversations with Sheila, which were later played in court. The tapes were incriminating. In one of the conversations, Sheila seemed to casually reference the murder of Lisa Raymundo, as though it were a distant memory, a simple act that had solved her problem. The recordings made it clear that Sheila's guilt was not just circumstantial, it was now a matter of undeniable evidence. The prosecution had its smoking gun, and Sheila's defense was rapidly unraveling. As the trial neared its end, the evidence against Sheila became insurmountable. She had attempted to present herself as a woman wronged by love, but the truth was far darker. Sheila's desperation to reclaim a man who had moved on, combined with her obsessive need to control every situation, had led her down a path of violence and deceit. The murder of Lisa Raymundo was the result of a cold, calculated decision to remove a perceived rival, someone who stood between Sheila and what she believed was rightfully hers. Sheila's emotional breakdowns in the courtroom, her unrelenting defense, and the mounting evidence of her guilt would all play a part in her conviction. But it was her own words, captured on the wiretaps, that sealed her fate. In the end, Sheila Davalloo's defense crumbled under the weight of the truth. On February 10, 2012, after nearly 2 weeks of testimony and a day and a half of deliberations, the jury delivered its verdict. Sheila Davalloo was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Lisa Raymundo. For Lisa's family, who had waited nearly a decade for justice, the moment was both cathartic and profoundly emotional. In the packed courtroom, there was palpable tension as the jury foreman announced the verdict. Lisa's mother, Susan Raymundo, sobbed quietly into her hands, overcome with the weight of the moment. Sheila, seated at the defense table, lowered her head and made the sign of the cross. The conviction confirmed what Lisa's loved ones and the prosecution had argued for years. Sheila Davalloo had meticulously planned and executed the murder of Lisa Raymundo in a jealous rage, driven by an obsessive desire to rekindle her affair with Nelson Sessler. The prosecution had presented a powerful case, meticulously piecing together the evidence against Sheila. From the DNA on the bathroom sink handle to the chilling 911 call and the wiretap recordings, every element of the trial reinforced Sheila's culpability. Her defense strategy, marked by deflections and attempts to cast doubt on the evidence, failed to sway the jury. The sentencing hearing, held on April 27, 2012, brought an opportunity for the Raymundo family to confront the woman who had stolen their daughter from them. Lisa's parents, Renato and Susan Raymundo, delivered heartfelt impact statements that spoke to the pain and emptiness they had endured since her death. They described Lisa as a brilliant, compassionate woman with degrees from Harvard and Columbia University, a perfect daughter whose life had been tragically cut short. Renato Raymundo called Sheila a heinous woman and described her actions as uncivilized and savage. Judge Richard Comerford, who presided over the trial, echoed these sentiments during sentencing. He described the murder as cold and calculated, invoking imagery from Dante's Inferno to illustrate the depths of Sheila's actions. "I hope you contribute to those with whom you are incarcerated," he said, noting that even in such a dark act there was room for reflection and redemption. Sheila was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Lisa Raymundo. This sentence was to run consecutively after her 25-year sentence for the attempted murder of her ex-husband, Paul Christos, which she had been serving since 2004. Combined, Sheila's prison time totaled 75 years, effectively ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. During the sentencing hearing, Sheila addressed the court in a bizarre and disjointed statement. She thanked the judge, jury, and even the corrections officers for their roles in her trial, claiming she had relied on her faith to endure the process. She even expressed sympathy for the Raymundo family, stating that she prayed for their peace and closure. However, her words rang hollow to those who had witnessed her unrepentant demeanor throughout the trial. Even as the evidence mounted against her, Sheila never admitted guilt, instead doubling down on her defense and attempting to appeal her conviction. For Lisa's family, the verdict and sentence brought some measure of closure, but the pain of losing their daughter remained. Her father, Renato, reflected on the long journey to justice, describing the emotional toll the years had taken. He and his wife had attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row and listening to the gruesome details of their daughter's final moments. Despite the verdict, they acknowledged that nothing could truly replace what they had lost. Paul Christos, Sheila's ex-husband and a key witness in the case, also attended the sentencing. He expressed relief at the outcome, noting that Sheila's lack of remorse and sense of entitlement throughout the trial were consistent with the behavior she had exhibited during their marriage. "She lives in her own shade of reality," he said, summarizing the psychological complexities of a woman who had carefully crafted her image but whose violent tendencies eventually unraveled her facade. The trial and sentencing of Sheila Davalloo became a landmark case, not just for its shocking details, but for its exploration of jealousy, obsession, and the lengths to which someone would go to maintain control over their life. But it is also one of justice and perseverance. It reminds us of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. As we remember Lisa Raymundo, we are reminded of the importance of cherishing the people we love and the necessity of seeking help when our emotions threaten to overwhelm us. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with others who are passionate about true crime stories. Join our community as we continue to explore more cases like this, delving into the darkest corners of human behavior and the relentless pursuit of justice. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.